Good afternoon to our attendees who are just joining us today. My name is Jennifer Lynch, and I'll be your host today for the Thought Leadership Series hosted by the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. I see that there's a few of you in our participant pod today. If you want to get us started by introducing yourself in the chat pod, letting us know where in the country you are so we can get a good idea of what states are represented and what organization you work for. We have a great agenda today for you. We have 3 experts from across the country who are going to be speaking to us about collaborating on impact. We'll have people from Colorado, someone from Pennsylvania, and someone from California. Lots of different thoughts and lots of different processes that they've been a part of. And we get to learn from their experience today. And I'm super excited, and I hope you're excited as well. So welcome to those who are just joining us. I see Sean and Trina, welcome. Rebecca, Cheryl, Antonia, we are so glad that you could join us today. If you guys want to take some time and just introduce yourselves in the chat pod, we are going to get to know everyone. And Antonia, fellow Goodwiller here. Jennifer Lynch here. I'm the Program Director of Reentry Services at Goodwill International. Always grateful when I see other individuals from Goodwill here representing us in the reentry field. For those of you who just joined us, today we're going to be presenting our Thought Leadership Series. This is a quarterly series that the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative hosts, where we're able to bring thought leaders from across the country together to discuss important topics that impact reentry and justice-related services across the nation. Today, our theme is going to be collaborating for impact, and we're going to have professionals talking to us today and sharing with us their best practices from Colorado, from California, and from Pennsylvania. And here I see Sean is here as well from the Pittsburgh Goodwill. Welcome, Sean, Goodwill of Southwestern Pennsylvania. And welcome to Rebecca from Project Reentry, a longtime partner of Goodwill in Northwest North Carolina. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I just want to be clear, this is not a Goodwill-centric webinar, even though I see quite a few of you guys in here. But for those of you who are just joining us, please go ahead, introduce yourself in the chat pod. We really want to get a good idea of who's representing what parts of the country today, what organizations are here in attendance, and how we can best serve you as well. So if there's anything specific you want to learn, please feel free to add that into the chat pod as well. So welcome to Trina from another Goodwill in North Carolina, and Laverne from Goodwill in South Texas. Really excited to have you guys here today. I'm going to go ahead and stop my video for a second because I think I might have been frozen, and hopefully that will unfreeze me. And we'll go ahead and continue with introduction. So Laverne's coming from Goodwill in South Texas. Today, Laverne, we are here to talk about collaborating for impact. And we're going to have a lot of great individuals here talking to us about their experience, bringing together different organizations to collaborate for reentry. And we'll be speaking with 3 individuals, one from the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, one from the Los Angeles Reentry Partnership, and one from the Colorado Department of Corrections as well. So as we get started and we wait for other people to join us, please feel free to enter your name into the chat pod. As a representative of the steering committee for the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative, we always want to see where we're able to make an impact and what opportunities there are out there. So I just want to say good morning and welcome to Catherine, who's joining us from Minnesota, from the Recovery Corps. Super excited that you're here with us today, Catherine, and can't wait to get started. We are just 4 minutes away from getting started with the formal content for our meeting today. So if there's any last minute runs that you need to do, please go do them now because we don't want you to miss out on any of this great content that we have today. Welcome to those of you who are just joining us. Quite a few people coming into the participant pod now. Welcome to those of you who are new. My name is Jennifer Lynch. I'm the Reentry Services Program Director at Goodwill Industries International, and also a member of the steering committee of the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. And we are so excited today to host you for the Thought Leadership Series, where we'll be focusing on the ideologies of collaborating for impact and how some professionals from across the country, how they were able to integrate services across several organizations to really provide the best level of services for individuals who've been impacted by the justice system. And so if you haven't heard this already, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat pod. Just want to say welcome to Christy, who's coming to us from Delaware. Christy is from PGM Consulting, so and representing the Wilmington Alliance. So I am a former University of Delaware alum, so glad to see you joining us here. And if anyone else is a blue hen, go Blue Hens, right? We really see a lot of people coming into the participant pod right now. Welcome to Patricia from Exit 318. Welcome to Nicole from Colorado. I see a very familiar name here for me. Welcome to Mila from the Pittsburgh Goodwill as well. We are just 2 minutes away from getting started with the Thought Leadership Series. Today, we're going to be focusing on collaborating for impact, and we are hosted by the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. My name is Jennifer Lynch. I'm a member of the steering committee for the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative, and will be your host today as well. I just want to say welcome to Jill from Los Angeles, and Lindsay from East Texas, and another Lindsay from Greenville, South Carolina. Welcome to Chris from Kansas. It's great to see so much representation from across the country and how we're all have the opportunity to collaborate for impact. Today we have 3 professionals with us from across the country. One based in Colorado, one based in Los Angeles, and another based in Colorado. Who are going to be talking to us about the initiatives their communities have taken for collaborating for impact in the reentry and justice related fields. Have a wonderful agenda here ready for you, and we are going to get started in just 60 seconds or so. So for those of us who have just joined, and to those of you who have been listening to me for a couple minutes now, you're going to hear the same thing again, but that's okay because we're super excited about being here. My name is Jennifer Lynch. I'm a member of the steering committee of the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative, and I'm your host today for the Thought Leadership Series, where we'll be talking about collaborating for impact, where we'll be featuring 3 professionals from across the country and how their organizations were able to collaborate for impact and make a difference for those who are justice involved. We will be getting started in just a couple seconds. So this is just one more reminder to go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat pod. Let us know what areas you're representing across the country and what organization you're representing. We love to see who's here joining us today and what opportunities perhaps we'll have to collaborate for impact in the future. And with that, it is officially 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So I'm going to go ahead and hand off the beginning of today's session for our Thought Leadership Series to get started. So we will go ahead and welcome Jason White, who is our chairman of the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. Jason has been working tirelessly towards putting together this initiative so that we can collaborate across the country. Jason also is the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Latino Coalition for Community Leadership. And it's my pleasure and honor to welcome Jason to our call today.
Thank you, Jennifer. And welcome everyone to our 3rd session of our Thought Leadership Series. We're so happy that you could join us today. The Thought Leadership Series is really our effort to facilitate continuous learning in the field. And every quarter we get together on one national platform to share practices, policies, and approaches that are really having an impact in the field. And we're really excited to share with you today that our topic is collaborating for impact. And it really reminds me of an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, travel together. And today our three presenters will be sharing from their experience regarding efforts that they've either led or participated in that have had wide-scale impact in their state or their region. So we're super excited to hear from them today. And we can't wait to hear some of the lessons that they've learned for us to learn from that as well. Because our goal is really to go far in the work in terms of impact. That being said, you've heard from Jennifer. Jennifer will be our host today. She is a member of our steering committee. And I'm excited that Jennifer gets a chance to lead this conversation today because she's very collaborative, always willing and eager to share her thoughts, to help however she can. So it is fitting for her to host this session. Before I hand over to Jennifer, I just want to share two things with you that are important for you to consider. First, at the end of the session, we will be announcing the next topic that we'll be covering in December. And during that time, shortly after, we will actually be administering a survey. A survey will pop up on your screen. Please do take a minute or two to complete the survey. We would like to hear from you. Your voice is important to us. From the survey, we'll understand how this session went, but we will also understand any topics that you'd like us to cover in future sessions. So again, welcome. We're excited to hear what our presenters have to share to us today. So I'm going to turn over to Jennifer at this time. Jennifer, please take it from here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason. Welcome to everyone. My name is Jennifer Lynch. I'm the Reentry Services Program Director at Goodwill Industries International. But more importantly today, as Jason mentioned, I am the proud steering committee member of the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. Today, we will be meeting to go over the topics of collaborating for impact. We all know that it takes a village to be able to make a difference in our community. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today as well, as we get the opportunity to work with three extremely talented panelists who have a lot of experience in trying to bring together our organizations. So if we could go ahead and go to the next slide. It is my proud pleasure to be able to introduce you today to these three professionals. First, we will have Dorenda Hamarlund from the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. Dorenda is a workforce development specialist under the Office of Reentry. We'll also have with us the Executive Director and the Chair of the Los Angeles Regional Reentry Partnership, Troy Vaughn, who'll be sharing topics about how they address this in the LA area. And lastly, we'll be hearing from Amberly Chalberg. She's the Associate Director of Community Reentry at the Colorado Department of Corrections under the Division of Adult Parole. And with that, it is my great pleasure to be able to get us started with our presentations today. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dorenda to get started with her presentation. Thank you, Dorenda, for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Jennifer. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are coming from. I am Dorenda Hamarlund. I am the Workforce Development Specialist with the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections and Parole. I am a transplant from California Department of Corrections. So those of you that are out in California, I am born and raised out there, so go California. But right now I'm here in PA. And I work here and I'm loving what we do here. And I'm so happy to share with you what I've done in the short 5 years, almost 5 years, as far as collaborating and everything with you guys today. So I want to do a little bit of an overview for our Department of Corrections. The one great thing about coming from Department of Corrections in California is to see the diversity and the differences between the two states. There's some similarities. Corrections is corrections, inmates are inmates. prisons are prisons. But then as far as the internal piece, there are some changes and differences in there. So I like to go over some of that. So the reason that I originally came over here was, came here to Pennsylvania, was to head up a career pathways grant that Department of Corrections here received from U.S. Department of Labor. It was pretty much how to establish career pathways inside prisons and continue outside. So we came up with 2 goals, and they're on the slide here. A goal inside the prison is, how do we ensure inmates are job ready at any step of incarceration? And then the outside goal, how do we assist employers with workforce needs and show the benefit of hiring our population? So that is what I continue to do, even though the grant is ended. So I want to give a little overview on Department of Corrections inside. We have schools, just like regular schools. We have principals, guidance counselors, adult basic education teachers, GED teachers, special ed teachers. We also have vocational programs. We offer 28 different vocational programs across our 24 prisons that we have. Some prisons have anywhere from 2, some have 5, depending on staffing and capacity. But those vocational programs actually come with nationally accredited certifications. So that is a great thing that will help inmates get ready when they leave to get a job. So it's not just them earning a prison vocation certification, they're actually earning a nationally accredited one. Once they get done with that, we move them into inmate employment or one of our correctional industries. We want them to actually use that skills that they just earned in the education. So for instance, if they've gone through one of our HVAC programs or our plumbing programs, we want to get them on the inmate maintenance crew, working alongside our staff, working on HVAC or plumbing inside the prison. So they're actually getting that hands-on experience that employers said is so vital. Then we also have some reentry service offices and information that help inmates once they're released, or prior to release, I should say, if they need assistance looking for jobs, housing, transportation, childcare, any treatment services, they can start getting some of those services prior to release. So as I mentioned, we do have 24 prisons throughout the Commonwealth here in Pennsylvania, as we span 67 counties. There's approximately 37,000 inmates that have been housed. That number has been going down since COVID. We've been doing a bunch of releases, not because of COVID, it's just we've had some reductions going on the last few years. And then on the parole side, probation parole side, we have approximately 40,000 inmates under parole supervision. And out of that, we have approximately 9,100 that are able to work that are currently not working. So that's where I come in. I do cover the whole state of Pennsylvania. So I work with employers on a daily basis for multiple counties throughout the state. So could I have the next slide, please? So to talk about the goal here today was about collaboration. I want to share a little bit of what we do here in Pennsylvania as far as collaborating. The big one is the Keystone Economic Development and Workforce Command Center. It's long, it's big. We just call it the command center. It's the governor's command center. Governor Wolf established this in 2019, I believe, and we met every Tuesday for approximately 14, 15 months and came up with a plan to the governor's office on how we can work together to improve unemployment in Pennsylvania. So it wasn't just Department of Corrections, it wasn't just labor departments coming together. Almost every single department had an agency representative, and we also had private parties and county and community providers a part of this to really talk about the workforce needs in Pennsylvania. So we have some committee barriers, and if anybody is interested in finding out more about that, let me know. I will have my email provided, so if you guys would like to see a copy of the report. Other things that we do is we have reentry coalitions. A lot of our counties do have these reentry coalitions that help for reentrants. They bring together community providers and private parties. I know that York County is represented today on this call. I saw Melissa on here. She heads our York County Reentry Coalition. I also collaborate with Department of Labor and Industry, workforce development boards, both the state workforce development board and the local boards. I have a lot of collaboration that we do with the chambers. We do state chambers and local chambers of commerce. You know, that's the great path to employers. So we collaborate a lot with them. And employers, that's really the biggest collaboration that I do. I already had 2 calls early this morning with employers that are looking to hire because, as everybody knows, unemployment is so high right now with COVID and everything that employers are desperate. They really just want somebody with a pulse. So what I do is I try to let the employers know, hey, these are the benefits of hiring our population. How can we work together? Paint that picture to me of what that great employer is, or employee is, and then I will try to find them. And then lastly, we do have some community providers that we also work with and collaborate with. Now, one thing I did not put on here, but is really important, is in order to work, you know, legally, well, you need to have I-9 documents. You know, you need an ID and social security card. We do have memorandums of understandings with the Social Security Administration and our PennDOT partners to provide those items for inmates prior to release. So that's another example of great collaboration, is with other state agencies within Pennsylvania. So with that, I think that I have run out of my time. I am going to hand it back over, I think, to Jennifer to introduce the next person. And I am here for questions, so please ask me any questions that you guys have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorenda. And just to answer a very popular question, yes, this will be recorded and the slides will be shared via email. So no worries if you want to focus instead of taking notes, this will be available later. As we move on, it is another great pleasure of mine to introduce Troy Vaughn. Troy is the Executive Director and Chair of the Los Angeles Regional Reentry Partnership. Troy, thank you so much for joining us today and can't wait to learn alongside everyone else as we hear a little bit more about your organization.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here, Jennifer and Dorenda. Thank you for your presentation. As Jennifer just said, my name is Troy Vaughn, co-founder and executive director for the Los Angeles Regional Reentry Partnership. Next slide. So the Los Angeles Regional Reentry Partnership is really a network of over 875 member organizations and individuals and public partners that strive to really make sure that there's inclusion and in terms of the work that we do, in terms of helping our returning citizens come back into the community from a vantage points of strength and security, understanding their resources. And so we are one of the only countywide networks of reentry focused nonprofit and public agencies, advocates, and academics working together to ensure our reentry system meets the needs of our agencies, communities, and the people that we serve. When we talk about in terms of policy and capacity building, some of our core workers around convening, capacitation, and public policy, and understanding that and translating that from a place of safety and strength. Next slide. We emerged in terms of an evolution, in terms of community persons coming together to really begin to address the issues early on, before we were actually called the Los Angeles Regional Reentry Partnership. We started out in a configuration of the LA Reentry Roundtable. We partnered with LA Sheriff's Department and their Reentry Advisory Board, and then some work that we were doing with the USC's Justice and Journalism Institute. And we came together around a project that was called the 21st Century Project. And at the time, there was some realignment happening in terms of community and gentrification. And so we were coming together to really come up with a solution. And so we did that, and we created a comprehensive report with some priorities. And then we began to work out those priorities underneath the 21st Century Project toward the end of 2009. And then that project went away. And then some members that were part of the LA Reentry Roundtable got together and said, we need to continue the work to take on those projects. And so about a handful of us became founding members of a new emerging entity called the Los Angeles Regional Reentry Partnership at the end of 2010. And around 2011 is when we really began to solidify who we were in terms of LARP. and begin to partner. And then realignment took place in Los Angeles. And so we knew that we needed to have more transparency in the budget process. And so I became a member of the public safety realignment team in Los Angeles called the Community Corrections Partnership. Next slide. And so now, fast forward 10 years later, our organization has grown immensely and really behind collaboration and understanding how do we coalesce around a common ideal, although that we have diversity, right? Like, and so we are many individuals and organizations that come together, and a lot of us serve multiple populations. But one of the things we're able to do successfully is keep our eye on the prize, right? Like understanding that collaboration really at the core and heart of what collaboration looks like is really coalescing around the common idea. And so as the executive director, I lead an amazing team. I have a program manager, Juliana Mendez, who basically helps me and our managing director run day-to-day operations. And then my manager director is a strategic partner along with myself and some of the other co-founders that are a part of our steering committee to help us really shape the direction of where we're going. And then we have a robust staff of talented people, but our work gets done through our committees. And so we form really a steering committee and an executive committee to help me run the overall goals and governance of the organization. The executive committee focuses on financial and governance, while the steering committee really helps us to understand what our platforms look like going into the next year. And so on an annual basis, we meet regularly and at the end of the year in December to kind of set our priorities for the next year as a network. And then we begin to get that work done through what we call Working in Issues Committee. We do that work in a very strategic way. Those committees then bubble up the three priorities that we come up with that coalesce around capacitation, convening, and policy. And we begin to do work through those committees. We have regional committees. Right now, those regional committees, they set up subsets of what LARP looks like as a whole organization in particular regions across LA County, including Antelope Valley, Pomona, Long Beach, and West Los Angeles, to really help us to really begin to map out what's unique in those particular regions, but having capacity or bringing collaboration together at a large scale. And then our issue committees focus mainly on policy and looking at voter engagement, and then our faith-based work that we continue to build upon. And then we actually start our work and really begin to drill down into our working committees, focusing on housing and employment and education and integrated health. And they really drill down and do a lot of the work. And recently we just launched last year, and then we're in our second cohort for the Leadership Academy, where we're taking people with lived experience and embedding them into the process. Next slide. Next slide, please. So just really, again, celebrating 10 years of working, building local rooted movement of reentry, changing the paradigm and the narrative around how we think about reentry in our county. Next slide. So some of our priorities are system change, looking at capacity, policy, and convening. When we talk about systems, we really look at how we deliver services and move away from particular models that focus in on an oppression, and we really begin to empower people from building up communities from a service lens instead of a carceral lens. And so we look at that and we will begin to promote that throughout our county. Capacity building, working with our organizations to build up their leadership capacity, their abilities to govern contracts, helping them to acquire those contracts, coming alongside them to make sure that they understand where their leveraging resources are in their community, and then really changing things from a policy lens. Throughout this presentation today, you start hearing me talk about we can't really bring about community change until we look at policy and begin to bring policy change, and then doing key convenings around particular issues that we can all focus on. So those are our core priorities. Next slide. And so if you want to get in touch with us, here's our contact information. Our office is located in the city of Inglewood. You can visit us on our social media platforms and or visit us at www.lareentry.org. And we look forward to continuing the presentation. Thank you, Jennifer.
And thank you so much, Troy, to yourself for sharing all that LARP has been started, where you guys got started, where you are now. Love the embracement of the social media up here as well. So these are good things to track down, great accounts to follow. And with that, we are going to go ahead and transition to Colorado. Amberly Chalberg, who's the Associate Director of Community Reentry with the Colorado Department of Corrections under the Division of Adult Parole, will be speaking with us about community reentry in Colorado. Welcome, Amberly.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer, for the introduction. Again, my name is Amberly Chalberg. I'm the Associate Director for Community Reentry here in Colorado. I really want to just thank you guys for the opportunity to present today. It's an honor to be here and to get to talk to you about some really exciting collaborative work that we've got going on in Colorado. For today's session, I'd really like to focus on a couple of our key partnerships between the Colorado Department of Corrections, some of our sister state agencies, and then several community-based organizations that are providing reentry support, services, mentoring, and really building a supportive alliance for individuals who are leaving our prisons. Next slide, please. So historically, parole has been working with community partners, but we weren't doing it in a really organized and formal partnership. And so this created some challenges for our clients and really reinforced the need for deeper rooted relationships in the community and to really create a sustainable framework for reentry. So in 2014, we had some state legislation passed to create the Work and Gain Education and Employment Skills Program. We call it WAGES for short. That program provides state funds to community partners that are providing reentry services in their neighborhoods and their communities, and then they work alongside of our officers and reentry staff in parole. With that legislation, there was also created an RFP process where DOC had selected Latino Coalition for Community Leadership to serve as an intermediary between DOC and the community partners or subgrantees, if you will. With the help of the Latino Coalition, we awarded grants to 7 community-based organizations to start WAGES. And since that time, we've grown to 20 different partners statewide. This has allowed us to really reach our clientele and to provide lasting reentry support, even in a lot of the rural areas of the state. Our goal was to exceed 3,600 referrals to WAGES last fiscal year, and we exceeded our goal by 200 referrals and made over 3,800 referrals to our partners. So since the inception of WAGES, we've been able to serve over 7,900 people. Aside from our partnership with Latino Coalition and WAGES, I also really want to touch on the collaborative partnerships that we've established to address homelessness amongst our population. I know it's something that we are all dealing with and struggling with. In 2017, the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, DOLA, their Division of Housing, was granted some funds from the marijuana tax revenue to create the Homeless Solutions Program. And so parole partners with DOLA to meet the needs of individuals who are justice involved and are really facing multiple barriers to their housing stability. We work collaboratively to identify appropriate candidates for non-time limited rental assistance and also connection to some local mental health support and resources. Through that partnership, in 2018, we partnered with DOLA and the Volunteers of America to implement a rapid rehousing program. The program is referred to as the CORE program, and it began as one of the first pilot programs in the country that connects justice-involved individuals with intensive rapid rehousing. That's financial assistance and housing-focused case management support, as well as some clinical support. So similarly to the WAGES staffing model that I was telling you about, our reentry staff are very involved with each rapid rehousing candidate, and they conduct regular staffings throughout the state with our BOA partners to address those barriers to reentry. So throughout the development of this whole program, our 3 agencies have really developed a strong partnership and continue to address implementation barriers that come up as a team. Can you go to the next slide, please? There are so many benefits to collaboration, and I think that these complex problems just can't be solved alone. It really does take partnerships and leveraged resources. CDOC, the Latino Coalition, and our community partners had to come to the table as a collective team and really be open to hearing everyone's ideas and perspectives on the best way to serve our population and how to do it together. And these relationships took time to build. And it's through that collaboration that we learned to listen to one another and to truly value each other's input. And we eventually got to a place where we understood that we all had the same goal. The partnership has really transformed the way that we're approaching community supervision. It's not uncommon now to find our community partners co-facilitating parole orientations with our staff, meeting with parole officers and clients at a parole office, or to see DOC reentry specialists or officers co-located and providing some of those reentry services from one of our wages partner locations. So it's not only just increased services for those individuals on parole, but I feel like this program has really built bridges between the Department of Corrections and the community, and that's resulted in increased trust, communication, and really true collaboration. Next slide. The impacts of our collaboration with our state and community partners, I think, are very important to talk about. First, I think that these efforts are changing the narrative about parole supervision for the community and for the clients. We're sitting down together, community partners and parole, and telling people that we're there to help them succeed, to coach them, and to mentor them, and to help them reach their goals. And we're transforming the way that we're doing things from what used to be a referee model that was overly focused on addressing violations to being real coaches and encouraging our clients to identify their strengths and to capitalize on them. So it's really that supportive alliance and that community connection that's setting this program apart from some of the other reentry models. I think that our communication within this team is stronger than ever. Our team approach continues where DOC division staff are meeting with our wages partners and Latino Coalition on a regular basis to facilitate staffings with each partner agency. And that really allows everyone to have a voice and for parole and community to be solving those issues together. And again, like I said, leveraging those resources and really creating sustainable success plans for their clients that they're working with. And then lastly, I would like to share just that our partnership with wages has led to the incorporation of additional diversified services and the inclusion of lived experience and mentorship. And we're doing a lot of that through facility and reach events and coordination. So right now we're starting a community connections pilot program in 3 of our facilities that's going to focus on connecting those individuals to a wages care manager on the outside and building that relationship and supportive alliance with a wages partner prior to their release. And now we're also working with several nonprofits who provide mentoring and coaching. We're doing CBT classes at the parole offices, as well as 24-hour-a-day phone coaching from individuals with lived experience. So these partnerships are really changing the culture and the mindset about who should be able to work with the clients. And we know how important a sense of connection and mentorship can be, and that those relationships and that support that someone can build in the community is really a game changer to reentry. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Amberly. So many great items here that you shared, and I'm so excited to hear about such a comprehensive partnership between you and Department of Corrections and your community-based organizations. Just some of the things you brought up. Cognitive behavioral based techniques, really glad to hear that there's movement with that, as we know that it's an evidence-based opportunity for individuals who've been impacted by the justice system. So thank you so much for sharing all that with us today. With that, we're going to go ahead and transition into some Q&A with our panelists today. And fortunately for us, Amberly is going to stay on with us right now, and she's up for the first question that I'm going to direct towards her. So ready or not, Amberly, here we go. As you reflect on your experience, I'm just curious if you could share some of the factors that made collaborating challenging for you or for the DOC.
Yeah. I think in our situation, we were dealing with a lack of trust between DOC and the community. And naturally, when you bring together diverse groups, there can be some hesitation to share information, and communication can be a challenge. So it took really thoughtful and really intentional relationship building before we felt like we were all speaking the same language. Secondly, I'd say organizations tend to operate in silos. And that just doesn't work when you're trying to solve complex problems. There really needs to be that true partnership when it comes to decision making and communicating. So the Latino Coalition really helped break down those silos by serving as a conduit for building trust, and convening the community to change that narrative about how they see parole. They helped nurture the relationships, and really be able to facilitate that honest, open dialogue that helped us through that process. And then lastly, as far as challenges, I would say organizational culture can be a barrier, and it's always slow to change. So this is especially true if an organization's culture doesn't seek out those external partnerships. So Parole, as well as our community partners, have really focused on shifting our cultures to value those resources, services, and expertise that we all bring to the partnership.
Thank you so much for that, Amberly. You talked a bit about, and I'm going to go ahead and, Dorenda, transition to a question for you. Amberly talked a bit about the effectiveness of collaborative efforts. And so I'm just curious, what advice would you give to organizations that want to build effective collaborative partnerships going forward?
Yeah, and I love, Amberly, that you mentioned about the silos, because that honestly is one of the biggest barriers to creating collaborations, is that if everybody just stays in their own silo, in their own tunnel, you don't see what everyone else has to offer. So that's honestly one of my biggest recommendations and advice is be open-minded. Listen to how other people are currently doing things. That was something that I had to challenge myself with, coming from Department of Corrections in California for almost 20 years, coming here to Pennsylvania. In my mind, I'm like, oh, it's corrections, but it's a totally different state. It's a completely different animal over here that I had to really listen and learn what they're doing here, how they do things here, and be really open-minded, and just almost being a student again and forgetting that whole California mindset. And I felt like I was starting all over again in the corrections field. Even though I had that 20 years experience, it was something brand new. So really just willing to listen to others outside of our field. We might think that we're the experts because we work in corrections, but sometimes having that outside voice and being open to it, and not just automatically shutting somebody down for their opinion or their recommendation. And the great thing that comes from that, once you do that, is now you have those connections made for anything in the future that you need to work with. So I know Jason wanted me to mention more about the Governor's Command Center. That was a perfect example. Bringing together all of these different agencies together at the table every Tuesday morning. We met for an hour and a half for a good 14, 15, 16 months. And every week an agency would present on workforce and what they're doing. I mean, you wouldn't think Department of Agriculture, Department of State, Department of Transportation, all these different Department of Health Services, Education, all of these different departments have some sort of a piece of workforce that they can help with. And I didn't know what these other agencies were doing. So that was fantastic to hear what these other agencies were doing. And then the real big benefit is once I listened to what they were doing, I thought to myself, okay, how can we work together? And there have been so many collaborations that have come just from listening to what the other people said. And then the real big benefit is if something came up on my end of a question, I had a contact for who to contact with. So if I had a question with, out of the blue, Department of Agriculture, they contacted me and said, hey, we have this collaboration with employers that want to hire reentrants. They contacted Department of Agriculture because that's who they thought to contact. They didn't think about contacting corrections, but Department of Agriculture knew to contact me. So it works both ways. They outreach to me, I outreach to them. That's actually how I got connected with the local chambers. The state chamber is actually on the command center also. So that's how I got connected with them. So I think I've gone over my time for that. So honestly, just listen, it's like being in kindergarten all over again. You turn your ears on and just say, listen, and be willing to hear what the other people have to share and bring to the table.
Yeah, Dorenda, thank you so much. And just a little bit about, just to do a quick deeper dive about the command center, because this may be the first time that a lot of our attendees are hearing about that. You shared a bit about who is on that. Could you give us a quick 30-second description of how that came to be and who joins in and collaborates with that beyond just Department of Agriculture and Department of Health?
Yeah, it actually came from a directive from Governor Wolf. So he, out of the blue, came up with this and said, you know what, look, our unemployment rate in Pennsylvania was so high, and it was a lot higher than the national average. So what did we need to do here in Pennsylvania for that? So he directed all the agencies to come together at a roundtable pretty much. And we came together and came up with what are the barriers. So there's Department of Education is on it, Department of State, Human Services, Health. I'm trying to think of Veterans Affairs, but then there's also private partners that are on part of it. Also, there's the chamber. They're not one of our state agencies, but the state chamber is at the table. I'm trying to think of who else is there. There is a report that we did publish right at the beginning of COVID. It did come out, and like I said, I will try to find that link and I can throw it in the chat if you guys would like to see the report that we did come up with a list of actionable items. Right now, we do have 5 barrier committees that we are actively working on, and I wrote them down so that way everybody knew. We have a reentry barriers committee, and these are all just barriers to workforce. It's not reentry specific. So the reentry barriers committee is just for reentry. But we have a licensure barrier, a training barriers committee, government infrastructure, and childcare and family support. So those were our big barriers to employment that we came up with that we are actively working on. And I can tell you, I'm the head of the reentry one, and on my committee, I have somebody from Department of Transportation, Department of Labor, and somebody from the governor's office, that are working on the reentry piece. It's not just me from DOC. So we're collaborating that way too. But I will find the report, the link for the report, and I will throw it in the chat for you guys.
Thank you so much, Dorenda. It sounds like, the perfect example of collaborating for impact, and that it doesn't just have to be done on an individual community level, but that it could be done at levels much higher as well, and that it can be successful in doing so. So we're going to come back to you in just a little bit. I want to transition to Troy. Now, Troy, I know you are a man of wisdom. So I really was hoping that you could share some words of wisdom for us about what are 2 or 3 things funders could do to collaborate or to encourage collaboration among their grantees that they're funding.
Yeah, I think for us, when we communicate to our funders, we need to understand too what the ROI is, what their objectives are, and to help them educate them in terms of really understanding where the pitfalls are in our community. A lot of times when we seek funding, whether it's government funding or philanthropic support, we do it without a sustainability plan in place, right? Like, how do we sustain funding in communities? And I think it really goes to some of the questions that have already been said around being able to trust systems to really create capacitation and opportunities to capacitate, to build capacity within our communities. What my advice to funders would be is that when we look to create programs, make sure that organizations and communities that are receiving those dollars have a plan of sustainability. One of the things that I don't like is when we create programs that are effective and working, and we like to throw around this word pilot a lot, where we pilot programs in communities to fill a gap. And oftentimes we do that, and then when that pilot goes away, you leave a bigger hole, right? Like we leave a bigger hole in the process. And so my advice is that when we're seeking funding opportunities from a funder's lens, I think it's important for funders to ask what the succession plan is, what the sustainability plan is. How do we begin to do that? When we talk about funding organizations should have strategic planning documents in place to really show how they're being thoughtful in terms of accessing. And that's a lot of the work that we do at LARC, is helping organizations to build that capacity, understanding how to actually answer the questions that are put before them. When we talk about processes and understanding systems, and when we talk about bringing dollars into our communities, we need to do that in a very thoughtful way. And one of those ways that we can do that is changing legislation, right? Like about how we bring funding into our community. We did some significant work. Members of LARC participated in Prop 64, which is the legalization of marijuana in the state of California. And those dollars that were going to be used, those tax dollars will be used as incentives. We worked hard to create the reparations components of that those dollars can be recaptured to go back into community in a very specific and channeled way. When you talk about collaboration, recently our organization with many other organizations and our county partners, we created the Alternatives to Incarceration initiative. And now we have a full department where we're looking at alternative solutions to incarceration. So our level of really directing funding, it comes from a place of collaboration, but changing policy and how that funding is directed in community and making sure it's getting into the hands of community. We're doing some good work right now with our probation department. Our probation chief leads a group of community-minded individuals, both community individuals and people from our county in our public safety realignment team, where we have community members and public organizations and government coming together to really begin to address what realignment continues to look like in our county. When realignment came into our county initially in 2011, many didn't know how the dollars were to be utilized. And we're still discovering how we can utilize those funds in a very creative way. And I think as long as we're at the table respecting each other, you talked about how do we come into collaboration. I like to approach it from basically the 2 T's, 3 T's that we come in when we trust, we have transparency, and we speak truth, right? We have to have trust when we come into collaboration, and we build that trust in a particular way, right? By being able to respect everybody in the space and not overtalk and not really come in with a one-sided opinion, and then being transparent. Being transparent of why you're at the table and what does that look like, really begin to understand that you're here for a particular reason and to continue to speak truth to that reason. And that's the last T, speaking your truth and being consistent with that truth and unapologetic about it, but not disrespectful about it, right? I think that's what we have to do. A lot of times when people come to collaboration, they forget why they're at the table. And I think if we keep at the forefront of why we're at the table, the issue that brings us together is the individual lives that we come here to serve, right? That we're trying to keep capacity for. A lot of times when we come, we forget that and it becomes about our organization, or it becomes about our pride that somebody offended us in a meeting, and so we start getting defensive and we don't stay in the right space and the right spirit of why we came to the table in the first place, and we lose sight of the reason why we're there to do collaboration and to build capacity. So I think those are the things that I would offer to some of the previous questions, but also around funding.
And Troy, you do not disappoint. Many, many great topics there. Loved what you had to say about sustainability. We always talk about sustainability starts on day one, and also love the way that you featured that sustainability is not necessarily just being refunded time and time again for the same exact program, but how do you build that capacity building in there? How do you break down those barriers so that the need for that funding isn't as pervasive as it might have been when you started. And so just really love that. One of the things I just wanted to follow up with you is you talked about the truth of why you're at the table. And I think an important component of what we do within our reentry programming, our justice-related funded programming, is remembering the importance of lived experience being at the table. Have you seen any examples of that through the work that you've done at LARP, or what difference has that made in your work, if you have seen it, where people who have lived experience with the justice system are able to help create some of those solutions that you're working towards?
Yeah, I'm a person of lived experience. I got one of my colleagues, part of the Just Leaders USA. LARP believes in community-led organizations that are led by people of lived experience and people that are uniquely connected to it. The reason why we believe that is because we believe those that are most impacted by the issues that we face around criminal justice reform, or whether it's homelessness, those are the individuals that oftentimes have the solutions to it, but they're furthest from the power and the resources. And so that's kind of like our mantra that we build upon, and we believe that with all our heart. And so our job now becomes to bring those people to the table, and we give access. The ways we do that at LARP is we created our Leaders Academy. So we intentionally created an academy that focuses on developing leaders and people with lived experience and give them exposure to policy making, giving them exposure to how the system itself works. And so we help them to find their voice, but bring that voice of advocacy to the table that's not disrespectful. Sometimes when we become advocates, we become the person that is more antagonistic in the room. You cannot do anything when you're not invited to the table. And the more antagonistic you become, you can be an agitator without being disrespectful. And the way you do that is master the issues. You have to master the issues and the conversations and do your own homework about what you're talking about so that you can speak from a data perspective. So we teach our people with lived experience how to do that in a very effective way. We find that it is the best way to get the work done. If you can't have people there that have been impacted at the table, then you're missing a key component to how you bring about the solutions in terms of recovery and in terms of community and reintegration. And when you talk about it as a whole, I'm the first person with lived experience that's been appointed by our governor to sit on our prison authority board here in California. And the reason why that's important is because I'm able to look at it from a lens and to communicate in a way that other people may not be able to see. And that's why we're able to create a prison to employment pipeline that's very effective in terms of moving people from a carceral system to an actual system of sustainability within our community. I'm proud of the fact that I have that ability in the lens. When you're going through it, it's hard, right? But when you come out on the other side and you see that every life experience that we all have here on this call today is a valuable experience. You might not see why you have that experience and why you've had it, but if you step forth in your transparency, right? And you allow that truth that's a part of who you are as a total person to come out in every area that you are, that's what transformation looks like. And so I think not having people with lived experience, it exposes your collaboration in a way that you will not be able to really get anything done, and it will not be sustainable.
Yeah, Troy, thank you so much for that. That is a great example of transformational partnerships, right? Where we're not just creating transactions back and forth between each other, having that transactional relationship, but where we're really working towards making change, both in the lives of those that we serve, but also in our communities as well. So I have one final question for the panel. I'm going to address this to each of you, and we'll go ahead and go alphabetically. So Amberly first, Dorenda, and then Troy, to give you each a turn, just so you guys know when you're coming up. When you're working in a collaborative nature, you're dealing with a lot of different stakeholders. And so when you think about the work that you've done with justice-related partners, community-based organizations, advocacy partners, partners in the government, could you reflect upon those experiences and please share 2 or 3 important lessons that you've learned through this time? And I'm going to give you a quick second to think about this. I just also want to remind our attendees, please start putting your questions in the chat pod and in the Q&A pod. I've been following along. Once we finish up with this question, we're going to go ahead and move to yours. So this is a time to get them in. So with that, Amberly, 2 to 3 important lessons that you've learned that you'd be willing to share with our audience today.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. I definitely want to echo the importance of including lived experience. We're trying to do that in everything that we're doing right now. We're bringing them into our implementation teams. We're sitting down and talking about ideas we have and asking them if they think that that's a good idea. So it's definitely, absolutely, it's a game changer for where we're moving. Secondly, I would say, you really cannot do it alone. I would encourage everyone to collaborate with organizations that align with your mission. Identify a broad and diverse pool of partners, right? And then nurture and leverage those relationships to create the real change. Creating those and nurturing those partnerships, though, takes time. So when you do bring together those groups of people with diverse backgrounds, sometimes competing priorities, it takes a long time to get everyone on the same page. So my advice would be, take your time and just be very intentional and thoughtful about how you're communicating. Be as transparent as you can be, and especially be inclusive. A seat at the table, it's an important start, but staying at the table together is how partnerships are going to really create that change. Partnerships between government and community benefit from mediators, or in our case, an intermediary. So in our model that we developed in Colorado, the Latino Coalition's role as an intermediary between DOC and the community was just so incredibly valuable. And their role is so important because not only do they provide guidance and mentoring and technical assistance for all the partners, but what they did different and what they did really well is they brought all the key partners together to provide a model of supervision that included parole and community working as a partnership. And then they helped to build that rapport and strengthen the relationship and build trust between entities that really had not relied on each other in the past. So despite some anxieties on both sides of the house, Latino Coalition was able to identify complementary roles that each entity were going to be able to play in reentry. And then parole staff started to see the value in our community partnerships and the perspective that they could bring to the table. And then community started seeing it, parole, in a different light, right? As no longer just folks that might be there to arrest someone or end up sending somebody back to prison for a violation. So it's becoming a true partnership to help individuals stay on track, to reach their goals, and to be really successful in the community. And it's also created a much wider safety net for people that might not have existed otherwise. So yeah, the role of the mediator intermediary was a game changer.
That's, as someone who runs intermediary programming, right? It's such great validation for myself to hear. I'm sure validation for others to hear. And just a great reminder that it's always good to have someone in the middle to help people communicate, because as you said, we all speak different languages, and trying to find that common denominator is really important. So Amberly, thank you so much. We're going to come back to you with some questions we have in the chat pod and the Q&A pod, but Dorenda, can you go ahead and share with us your 2 to 3 lessons learned that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Amberly really touched on the biggest ones. To tell you the truth, I'm just going to echo a lot of what she said. And Troy also, I was going to just shout out that the lived experience piece is so vital in everything that we do. If you're talking about collaborating, making sure you have the right people at the table. Otherwise you could be steered off course. So you need to make sure you have the right people at the table. And sometimes it isn't top brass that are the right people to be at the table. You need to have the people that have the buy-in, that have the passion for it, and have the experience for it. Without that, you're not going to have a successful collaboration if it's just, for lack of a better term, a bunch of talking heads talking at each other to come up with something. You really need the people that have that lived experience. And I'm not just talking about whenever it comes to reentry, I'm talking about in any collaboration that you go to do. And we do that with our reentry coalitions. It's not just Department of Corrections, probation, parole, county, correctional staff that are part of those reentry coalitions. We do have reentrants on our boards and that are participating because, and I say this all the time, what we don't know, we don't know. We can make assumptions all we want that what we think that we need to change or what we think we need to do differently, but without getting that shared experience and collaborating with the people that have that lived experience, then we're not going to make any difference. We're not going to make a positive difference. Let me put it that way. We can make a difference, but it's not going to be a positive difference unless we have the people that it's affecting at the table. So I think, honestly, I don't have 2 to 3 points really, other than still just you open your ears, listen. But I think the biggest thing is having the right people at the table when you're collaborating. The more the merrier isn't always necessary when it comes to collaborating. Sometimes too many cooks are in the kitchen. So I think it's more important to have the right people than to have more people.
Yeah. Dorenda, what you are saying is being validated in the chat pod. Lots of love coming your ways. With lots of exclamation points. So thank you for sharing that. And Troy, we're going to go ahead and head over to you. You shared a lot of wisdom with us already, but do you have a little bit more that you could share with us? What are some lessons you could share with our audience today?
Well, Dorenda just touched on one of the things that I learned is about the people. So I say people, patience, perspective, and pivot, right? And so again, I just won't say too much about people because it's been said already, but again, people, patience, perspective, and pivot. So I'll talk about the patience piece since we've already spoken about the people and the necessary for that, having the right people at the table, but being patient with the process, right? Like we need to understand that collaboration. I learned, and I've been doing this for a number of years now, that change can come slowly, right? And then when you're talking about changing systems and you're really beginning to understand, and you're talking about collaboration, you need to be patient with the process, right? And really come to the table with the right perspective, that you're there to work with people, right? Like you're not there to just get your agenda done. I think a lot of times when people approach it from the wrong perspective, collaboration doesn't work because they're just there for themselves. And that's why we have to make sure that our perspective is right and that it's connected to understanding that I'm there to work with the people and that I'm patient with the outcomes that I'm trying to do. And then, though you're invited to the table, as Amberly spoke about, it's better now to understand you want to stay at the table, because really what's going to happen is that you're going to be able to broker more deals when you get to the smaller tables. You get to the big table and you're talking about the issues, but the smaller tables that oftentimes are happening in other areas, those are the tables you want to be invited to, right? People want to call you and pick your brain. I'm very grateful that I can call my chief of probation, call probation, call our parole, have a conversation with our mayor, our governor, and talk to our community leaders that are actually doing this work. And some of those individuals may not agree on issues, but being a neutral party as LARPy is, we are that neutral convening body here in Los Angeles where we bring those people together. But being able to hear all of those different perspectives and have respect for all of those perspectives, but helping to keep everybody coalesced around the idea of why we're in the work in the first place. And then finally, I would say the pivot. Things happen in this work And if we're so rigid in our approaches and we're not able to pivot and make the adjustments that we need to make, we're not going to be effective. And so things can happen like COVID. I saw a question in the chat. What happened? COVID caused everybody, the pandemic caused us to pivot. How we do our work. We're now meeting remotely. Systems had to change the way our housing providers had to do work. We needed to come up with COVID protocols that we can disseminate to our network so that everybody can have. We needed to disseminate PPE that some of our providers were getting because they had government contracts. Others weren't in the loop with that communication. We needed to be that vehicle for them. Resources in terms of creating platforms around education for testing and getting the vaccine and doing that work. So if we hadn't learned anything in this pandemic, we should learn that collaboration needed to look different, and we needed to pivot and still get the work done because people were coming home, and a lot more people were coming home. People were being released at a lot of alarming rates and numbers, and the system wasn't being ready to receive them. And so it was important for us to pivot and pivot quickly, to keep our perspective in place, to realize we needed more people than ever before, and to be patient with the process and with one another during this change, because I think without those things, we wouldn't be able to survive right now. So those are lessons that I've learned, and just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you, Troy. We have about 10 minutes now to take questions from the audience, some of which have already come in. First, I'm going to take our attention to Amberly. A question came in from Sue that says, in Colorado, how do you train or support mentors who are available 24/7? And are they paid wages or stipends?
Sorry, I'm hoping that I heard your question correctly. Mentors, how do we train mentors and coaches?
How do you train and support the mentors, and are they provided stipends or wages for the work that they do?
So currently, they're not. They're actually using their own grant funding, and they're providing some of those services to our clients throughout the state by just using those funds. So we're not providing them a stipend of any kind. They just really want to help the population. And then we're bringing those community partners in and meeting with them on a regular basis and talking through the types of things that they want to provide and what we collectively think is important. And so a lot of them, you know, they've been through a lot of programming and they've been through a lot of CBT themselves. They've got a lot of the skills. And some of that mentoring is just building that relationship with the client and being able to listen to them when they need somebody to talk to and provide some advice from a perspective from somebody that has been there, done that perspective. So we are meeting regularly with them and talking to them about these components that we'd really like to see. Like we're building in things like role plays and skill training with directed practice with our clients, where they can get together in a setting and practice through some of these scenarios and then get feedback from their mentors. And then our staff, a lot of the time, will sit in on some of those things. And then through side-by-side mentoring and through the Denver Dream Center, they've got a lot of folks on staff, some that don't have lived experience and some that do. But either way, anybody could pick up the phone 24 hours a day and call them and have somebody to talk to. So I think that as we move forward and as we build those partnerships, I'm sure hopefully there'll be some opportunities to expand on that and to try to at least assist them in finding the resources that they need to grow and build that capacity. But as of right now, no, they're not getting a stipend. Okay.
Thank you, Amberly, for sharing that. Dorenda, I'm going to squeeze two questions into one for you. So we have two different questions from two different attendees. One is, how does housing fit into the work that you do working towards employment? And as well as there's a question about the Chamber of Commerce. What is the role the Chamber of Commerce plays, either in the command center or with your collaboration? So I know that's two different perspectives, but kind of wanted to squeeze two in there on you.
Sure, and I'll add a third because I did see a third earlier about Reentry Coalition's list. If anybody would like a list of the Reentry Coalitions, not to upstage you, Jennifer, but if anybody wants a list of those Reentry Coalitions, please just send me an email. And I know my contact information will be available and I can get you a list. As far as the chamber collaboration, yes, that was the first time that I ever had any contact with the PA chamber, local or state chambers, was at the command center. They were one of the co-chairs of the command center. When the governor established it through an executive order, he had some chairmen, chairpersons part of it, and the state chamber was actually one of the co-chairs. So that is how I initially got involved with the chamber. And then from there, their workforce person brought me on a podcast with them. I did a podcast, I did a written document for them. And then local chambers, they have contacts with their local chambers, so they just threw my name out there to local chambers. I've actually gone out and have done some events with the local chambers of commerce. I've done Bucks County and North or South Central PA, also, or Central PA chamber. And what I've done is did some workshops and employment roundtables for employers to find out the benefits of hiring reentrants. So really it was just a word of mouth, but it really could not have happened without the command center. I did not have that connection. They didn't know who I was. So it was really through there. The other question about housing, we do try to focus a lot on the housing because housing is a huge barrier for our reentrant population. When somebody gets out of prison, if they do not have an approved home plan, then they could go to one of our community correctional centers. It is not supposed to be a permanent, it's supposed to be temporary until they can find an approved housing. So housing is definitely a big challenge for us. So what we do, it doesn't really have too much to do with my work as far as the employment piece of it. I try to help more with the transportation piece, but we do have a focus. We have these service lots through our Department of General Services that oversees them, and we have different service lots that help that we will pay through some funding. Housing happens to be one of them, drug and alcohol treatment, workforce development, batters and invention. I think there's like 9 or 11 different lots, and housing happens to be one of those that we do try to partner with some community providers throughout the Commonwealth that do provide housing resources for us. We also have what we call community reentry parole agents. So when somebody gets out of prison, they have their field agent, but then they also have a community reentry parole agent. That's a boots on the ground person that works with the community providers in that community, whether it's employment, childcare, housing, transportation, anything at all that they need, that is their source. And they actually do meet with them upon release for an orientation, and they can connect with them anytime if they do need help with housing. So they're the central person. Instead of having one person overseeing all the housing for the state, it's better to have somebody there in the community that does know. Our reentry coalitions actually have a lot of housing resources also. So I try to connect those if needed to.
Yeah, thank you, Dorenda, so much for all that information. Troy, this was not a question posed to you, but I do know that you have some experience with housing voucher barriers in your area, I believe that Jason shared with me. Would you mind sharing a little bit about the implications for that and how that impacts the people that we try to serve?
Well, our work centers around focusing on the exclusions to those barriers, working with our Section 8 departments, and really helping individuals to be included, like being able, as a housing resource, people that have served their time should be able to go back to their families. And some of the federal and local housing authority, under some of the federal stuff, but then at the local housing authorities who have autonomy, create barriers and maintain those barriers for people to be included back. We were able to work with our housing authorities as a network to reduce some of those barriers so that people can actually return back to their family members who actually wanted them back. And that their voucher wouldn't be violated, and they wouldn't lose the housing as a result of that. So that's an example of why we need to work on things like with our landlords in our communities. Like when we talk about policies and laws that we try to focus on that act as barriers, there's many collateral consequences to our returning citizens. In California alone, we have over 48,000 collateral consequences, and we begin to look at all these different consequences where people can't get a license to be a barber or to walk a dog or whatever the case may be. And so we focus on reducing those types of barriers. There was a question in the Q&A for me around professions that people, when they see people in terms of professions and easy professions for offenders to transition. And what we found is that people that are returning home, they make great advocates, right? Like in peer advocates and mentors. And a lot of times people find themselves going back to school or using their education that were in school to be counselors or case managers in various nonprofit organizations and to start. And that got us to thinking many years ago about what we wanted to do in terms of creating a job classification. And so we worked with our county and our board of supervisors with some of our justice deputies, and we put a motion on the table that actually created a unique job classification that became community health workers in our community. And they are now a part of the hiring in the county. And so at that point, the county became a major hiring partner for individuals with lived experience. In fact, it became a part of mandatory contracting that we were able to advocate for. So we see an inclusion in our contracting processes here in Los Angeles County for our community health workers, that one of the skill sets that people are usually looking for is people with lived experience. That is a part of the experience requirement to be a community health worker. And so those are the kinds of things that we need to do in terms of creating the job classifications. The other thing that we do is we focus in on micro and social enterprise development, right? Like where we look at when we get the dollar into our community, how can we keep that dollar and then leverage that dollar in a very creative way? And a lot of times when we're contracting with the county, the state, the city, our line items give us the example that we need. So we spend money on food, for example. And one of the things that we did to one of our community agencies that I oversee, I have about 5 businesses that are micro social enterprise driven, where we hire people with lived experience to provide a service to our community-based organizations that they need, right? For example, here in our county, the Department of Public Health came to a lot of our transitional housing providers and said you couldn't cook meals in the home because they weren't commercial kitchens. So one of the things that we did was we purchased a commercial kitchen. And so we now have 2, getting ready to open a 3rd location, where we now provide meals to those community-based organizations. And they were able to realize their line item on their budget is to actually pay for those meals at a cost that was more reasonable in terms of going out with a vendor that couldn't do that. That's the kind of creative thing that we need to do. We're in the process of starting a laundry service business called Fresh Cycle. Our food service business is called Manafeeds. We're getting ready to start Fresh Cycle, which is a laundry service business, which will work with making sure that individuals who are incarcerated right now, many of them get skill set in laundry services under PIA here in the state and in the prison system. And so when they come out, not many of them connect into the laundry business, but laundry services are still needed because a lot of those agencies contract with the state and the county to provide recovery-based treatment housing, and they need to have laundry services. And so a lot of times they filter that laundry services out to a profit entity. And so my mind is like, create the entity ourselves, own that dollar, create the capacity, hire people that are coming home in those jobs because they are uniquely trained and qualified to run those type of facilities, and control the dollar and control the workforce in our space. So right now it's about controlling the workforce And I think that's the conversation that I'm having now nationally and with people, is that we control our own workforce, because we're actually training people with skill sets that are needed in the community. And when we do that, I think employers become more attractive to the people that we have, because we now position ourselves to control the dollar that actually our community-based organizations are utilizing every day.
Troy, it sounds like you are onto a topic for a whole nother session that we could spend another 75 minutes on. So maybe stay tuned in the future. Troy, thank you so much for sharing all that. We do have one question in the Q&A pod asking about if you could clarify what the 5 Ps were, if you could put those into the chat pod for us. And there was just one question we didn't get to about the relationship with health issues, that if any of our panelists would feel kind enough, if maybe we could just address that in the chat pod as we move to closing remarks. So many, many thanks to Amberly, Troy, Dorenda for taking time out of your day to speak with us about collaborating for impact. I'm impressed with the work that you guys are doing in each of your state, and thank you for the support that you're providing to the people that we're intending to serve. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition us back to Jason White, the chairman of the steering committee for the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative, for some closing remarks. Thank you, Jason, for joining us again.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much, Troy and Amberly and Dorenda, for sharing those words of wisdom with us. It is amazing how much impact efforts to collaborate have had in your respective, whether it's a region or your state. You know, as you were talking, a thought that just kept going through my mind was, what if these collaboration did not happen? How much the communities that we serve would have lost or lose. So I'm grateful that we got some time to talk about this topic. The conversation was rich, and we really look forward to staying in touch. In the interest of time, I just want to share 2 quick things before we transition. One, as I had mentioned earlier, you will be receiving a survey. Please, please, please do take a minute and give us your feedback. It is essential. We want to provide good content to you as we move forward, so we really value your voice. So please do take some time to share your thoughts. The second thing I wanted to share is December 3rd, we have a tentative time for our next session. The topic that we'll be covering is employer engagement. I think it was Dorenda that mentioned how much employers are in need of personnel to fill vacancies in their companies. So we really want to spend some time looking at that topic. We have 2 confirmed speakers so far. One from Jobs for the Future, JFF. It is one of the leading organizations as it relates to workforce in the country, and also Center for Employment, which is actually a steering committee member. They are participating in and leading some significant effort as it relates to fair chance hiring. So we're excited to hear from them. We will also be onboarding an employer that has committed to fair chance hiring. So we are looking forward to the session in December. And as I said, please do take a quick minute to give us some feedback. Thanks to Jennifer Lynch for hosting, and Emily Trek for really managing things behind the scene. Emily, we really appreciate all your work. And thank you guys for joining us today. If it wasn't for your participation, this time that we spent together would not be successful. So thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you in December. Take care.